In this video, I will explain to you how to approach a difficult question that you are faced with. Consider that question 4 of the 2019 exam paper. The majority of students will not be able to solve this question in totality. In some instances, students may concede the marks and focus on other questions in the exam paper. My advice is to attempt the question knowing that you will not get the full marks, but to attempt to get the maximum possible marks you can get by doing the basic requirements that are required in the question. You may not be able to put all the statements in the right sequence to get it to work the way it needs to work. However, you need to show the examiner that you have the basic concepts to solve the questions. In question 4, it contained a total of 30 marks. It was made up of 2 parts, question 4.1, which was 11 marks, and then 4.2, which was 19 marks, giving you a total of 30. If we look at question 4.1, this part of the question was not very difficult. You should have at least have gotten 10 out of 11. So this ought to have been a good start to the question. However, when you get to question 4.2, this looks a difficult question. It requires you to do a lot and to have it in the right sequence for it to work. But if we evaluate the question, let's see what are some of the basic things that you are required to have. The first part is you are reading from an array, ARRNAs. So we know how to read from an array. You create a loop from 1 to the size of the array, and you work with each cell in the array. So that will get you marks immediately. The question requires you to look at consecutive spaces. We're counting consecutive dashes. To look for consecutive dashes, in other words, we're evaluating each cell of the array, a second loop is going to be required. And we want to check position I, and what's next to position I? Position I plus 1. So we want to see if array position I is equal to a dash, and array position I plus 1 equals to a dash. That means you've got consecutive horizontal spaces. How do you then know when you've reached that there's no longer consecutive? In other words, I've got a dash followed by some other character, in this case, like a hash. Well, in the same way we looked at consecutive spaces, if the array position I is a dash and array position I plus 1 is not a dash, that means you no longer have consecutive dashes. So these are 2 basic if statements that you can have as part of your coding. If we then look at the third requirement, we need to find the maximum number. Maximum means finding highest. To find highest, you know you need to have a variable high, set it to 0, and then check if you can find something greater than high, and then replace that value. So that's a technique that also needs to come into this entire solution. If you can at least show you can read from the array, you can then search for consecutive spaces, and then when it's non-consecutive, and then you can show the concept of finding maximum number. I think from a total of 19 marks, we could get a possible 10 marks. And if we take 10 plus from question 4.1, we had another 10, 20 out of a total of 30. That's close to about 70%, which is fairly decent for a question that we found to be very tough. So these are just a few pointers that I thought I'll share with you when you are working with a question that you find to be difficult.